Good morning, everyone. It is around that time again. Welcome to Four Lakes Church of Christ. We are happy to have you this morning. Okay. Okay, it sounded like there was no. It was so pleasant though. It's like, oh. Yeah, like a distant band. Yeah, I need walk-up music for class time. Now, if you all close your eyes, no. Welcome to our class, our study of people of the gospel, or gospel personages, as this study is titled. We have just finished up Andrew, and in the most fitting way possible, the very first name mentioned after Andrew is always Peter. So here we go with Peter. Peter, obviously the brother of Andrew. Peter usually doesn't need much introduction when it comes to the Protestant church. He is kind of a big figure, especially amongst all Christian walks of life, but especially, on the Protestant side of things. He's one of the big two of kind of post the Gospels of the figures that we see. So, Peter is actually, I'm pretty sure, the only person who we're going to study three times, 3 lessons in a row. So we're going to kind of look at each aspect of Peter and kind of how he evolves, the different pillars that kind of make up why Peter is the way he is. And, it kind of helps that Peter's one of the more, if not most, talked about apostles individually. Just because there's a lot that Jesus sees in Peter, but also that he sees beyond just, this is a good guy right here, and now he sees someone who can be a leader. Someone who has struggles, just like anybody else, but someone who he sees has the potential to carry this thing far beyond after Jesus has ascended. So here, we're going to really dig into what makes Peter Peter. So, if you want to open up your books or if you want to open up, you're already in their books. If you want to open up your Bibles, we're going to start in Luke. We're going to start in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. There's a lot of stories that are mentioned in maybe 2 of the Gospels, 3 of the Gospels, but maybe not in the other. There is one story, there's a lot of stories that are in all 4 Gospels, but one of the earliest ones that we see is Jesus calling Peter and those first 4 apostles. And so if we open up to Luke chapter 5, we see Luke's interpretation of the story. Oops, I'm in the other reading here. There we go. All right. Oh, that's why I'm in the wrong book. Apologies. I always get my bookmarks. Cool. Okay. So, Luke chapter 5, we're going to be reading through the first 11 verses there. If someone wants to just start with verses 1 through 5. Someone wants to read that real quick.
Now it happened that while the crowd was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw 2 boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little ways from the land. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered and said, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but I will do as you say and let down the nets."
All right, so here we see It takes Luke a little longer to get to the calling of the apostles, just because he really likes to focus in on like the lead up of John the Baptist, who speaks about the coming of Jesus, who's then baptized. And then once he establishes, he's very much established Jesus is the Messiah as told by multiple people, then he gets on to Jesus going to his disciples. So here we see Jesus calling the first disciples. So at first it's kind of less of a calling, and we don't know if there was any context given to Jesus just hopping in this boat, but at the time, Jesus comes to be teaching by a large lake, and he saw two boats, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go out on the boat with you, but I'm not going to help fish. I kind of need to talk to these people, but there's a bunch of them. And so these fishermen are like, all right, sure, whatever. And so he gets out on the boat, and he starts speaking. And after a while, he stops speaking. He's kind of come to the end of his lesson. And he turns to these fishermen who are career fishermen. Like, it's established that Peter and his helpers had been doing this for a while. They knew what they were doing. And it seemed that they weren't doing very well. And here, this guy who they've just heard teach about whatever it was he was speaking about, the guy just turns to him and says, why don't you go a little further and cast right there? And if someone walked into your job, you had zero idea who they were, you had just heard them give a little speech maybe about spirituality or something, and then they come in and they're like, you're not turning that wrench right. Maybe you ought to try turning it this way. What would be your reaction? Excuse me, who are you? What are you talking about? Go away. And yet here we see Peter, here's launch out into the deeper parts and cast your net. And we see that Peter, as any human being probably would, he does have a bit of not an edge to his response, but he goes, dude, we haven't caught anything all night. But since you said something, it's like, it's the parent like, okay, like knows this isn't going to go well, but lets it happen anyway, because let's just see what happens. And so here we already,
And in one place that I read, it said, and they had washed their nets, and they were all ready for the next day.
They were packing it up, like, all right, guys, today wasn't the day, we'll try again. And now Jesus is saying, hey, why don't you toss those nets back out? And they're like, no, we have to wash them again. Why is this guy making more work for us? We just let him on our boat. But we hear that even at the beginning, with Peter not knowing who this guy is, he says, okay, maybe there's something that I don't know about this guy. And so they drop down the nets. And so if someone wants to read verses 6 through 11.
And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fish, and their net brake. And then they beckoned unto the partners which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he was astonished, and all that were with him, at the draught of fishes which they had taken. And so was also James and John, the sons of Zebedee, which were partners of Simon. And Jesus said unto Simon, Fear not, from henceforth thou shalt catch men. And when they had brought the ships to land, they forsook all and followed him.
All right, so we see that despite Peter thinking he has everything figured out, thinking that this couldn't possibly work, the miraculous happens. And they catch so much fish that they fill 2 boats. Amongst y'all, how many of y'all consider yourself like fishers? Like you go out, you like fishing. Exactly. Okay, like a tentative one. I have to remember I'm not in Oklahoma anymore, so back home, everybody. Yep, I go out every once in a while, yeah. But in general, how do fish behave? Are fish constantly moving? For the most part. However, the thing is that fish have areas where they have like their home base kind of area. Oftentimes, you'll see folks that'll tell you, you want to go fishing over by the shade. because when it becomes sunny, that's where fish feel safe. They feel like this is a deeper part of the water. So, in general, the fish tend to they'll move and they'll kind of stay in their schools, but they'll kind of stick to an area. And so here Peter is just using his logical brain. He's gone, we've gone to the most likely place for these fish to be, and we haven't caught them. So in his brain, he's thinking, there is no way these fish have just randomly decided now, oh yes, we're going to go to the spot now. No, they've found their place, and we just can't find it. It's just not going to happen. And that's why this is so miraculous. You can happen upon one fish. You can accidentally snag a straggler who just happened to come towards wherever your lure is. To have such a catch in a net that it fills 2 boats, most nets are really only made to catch enough fish to fill 1 boat. And yet this net was so burgeoning with fish that they were able to fill up 2 boats to the point that they were nearly about to sink. So again, the miracle wasn't that they caught fish. It was all the other factors. It was where they caught it. It was how much they caught. To the point being that the fisherman immediately forgoes any thought of, oops, we're sinking. Oops, we caught too many fish. He falls down and says, depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. And here we see where Peter is starting to show the notes of, this isn't just a faceless guy who's going to follow me around for a little bit. This person immediately after seeing something miraculous, yes, miracles are amazing, and was one of the tools for bringing about a people who were pretty stubborn set in their ways. But here we see that it doesn't take much. Peter immediately says, "O Lord." And it's interesting that his first thoughts aren't of praise, aren't of, lifting up, aren't of, oh my goodness, this is amazing. His first thoughts are, not me. Like, even in his first moments, he's already almost apologizing for half doubting Jesus. Like, he did as Jesus said, but in Peter's heart, he knows, I just did this kind of out of, almost a little bit out of spite, but a little bit out of like, oh yeah, whatever, sure, fine. He almost feels bad that he didn't immediately wholeheartedly obey this person. And so it shows Peter's humility from the start of, it wasn't, oh, I found the Messiah, I've found this person, I have to go tell everyone. His first words out of his mouth are, depart from me, I am not worthy to even be at your feet. He's on a boat, he's on this boat with this guy full of fish, and his first thoughts are, I'm not worthy to be around this person. Yeah.
I think Peter had suspicions knowing Jesus, but couldn't really say for sure in his heart, this is who we're going to follow. But when he was in the boat, for some reason, I think that's when he figured, you are the Messiah.
Yeah. The threads start to connect. He's a teacher, has a great following of people that are willing to stand on the side of a lake and listen to him speak. He just told us to put our nets in an area that shouldn't be catching fish, and suddenly we're catching fish. You can see the click, 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 little light bulb. Ba-ding! Oh. And then, the following, professing. And so, after he says this, understandably, for he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so he calls over his fishing buddies, his guys in the other boat, let's get out of here. And Jesus, with the very well-known line, do not be afraid, from now on you will catch men. This wasn't just Jesus being in the right place at the right time. This was Jesus knowing exactly how he could teach these fishermen a lesson by showing the equivalent of what they're fixing to do. There's a better way to word that. Jesus wanted them to be able to connect the dots between just how you go out and you put out your nets and you catch fish and you bring them back in the same way I want you to do in a manner I want you to bring people to me. In the same way that you bring in fish, you're going to go out and you're going to bring in people to the good news. And so with that very object lesson in place, they go out and they start getting more apostles and eventually start teaching with the 12 apostles as we know it. So they brought back their boats to land. They forsook all and followed him. And there's one of the hiccups that we often find trips up people whenever Jesus asks them to come and follow him. They forsook all. They brought in their boats, they put away their nets, and they took off. Didn't have a care or a thought about, what am I going to do with my boat? Let me go sell my boat first. I can probably get a good price for all this stuff. They brought it up on shore, and off they went. And so, obviously all the apostles are commendable for this, but for our object lesson here, Peter lets this stranger onto his boat, sees this miracle, knows that this is Jesus, the Son of God, and essentially tosses away everything and says, all right, this is my life now. This guy, this Messiah, that's the only thing I need. I don't need my nets. I don't need my fishing boat. I just need to hear what he has to say and to do what he says. And so they do. There's countless accounts from the four Gospels and even after that into Acts of the things that Peter does. He becomes not the most important apostle because, again, we see in certain times where the apostles start to ask Jesus, who's going to get to sit at your right hand? Even James and John's mother comes by and says, Lord, let my boys sit at the right hand of your throne. And he tells them, he's like, that's not what this is about. I didn't come here to establish the hierarchy in heaven. I came here to bring people to the Lord. But Peter, again, is one of the most, has the most written down examples of what he does, and we'll go into more detail about that in our further studies later on. But what I want to focus on now is, as it's entitled, Peter the Fisherman. And so the beginnings of Peter set up for countless miracles, countless lessons, countless falling aways. That's going to be one of our studies in a couple weeks is Peter's denial. That's the big elephant in the room that always comes with Peter. But again, part of the amazing thing about Peter is that despite all these things, despite the backs and the forths, all of his lessons, all of his miracles, all of the bad stuff, Jesus knows exactly who it is that he wants to make an example. Because as we know, later, before the crucifixion, Jesus asked the apostles, who do the people say I am? Oh, they say you're John the Baptist. They say you're this person, this person. And then he asks, who do you say I am? And Peter is the first one to say, you are Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church. And it's interesting because Simon, in Hebrew, the general meaning is to hear, to be heard, or in some context, reputation. Which is fitting, because Peter has become one of the has one of the better reputations in the Bible, post all of the Jesus and the crucifixion stuff. But it's interesting that when we talked about Andrew, we heard whenever Andrew calls Peter to go meet Jesus, what does Jesus quickly tell Simon is going to be his new name? Peter. Or in Greek terms, they also say Cephas. And what does Peter or Cephas mean in their original languages? Rock. That just clicked a couple months ago that like pewter, oh. Yeah, very similar words that are taken from one another, but one uses name. But yeah. So here we see Jesus is building up Peter, Simon, Cephas, whatever name you choose to use. He's already establishing something that is going to last a lot longer than just Peter's actions, Peter's name. The reputation, the original name Simon, his reputation goes on to become the rock Peter, upon which the church is established. And so Jesus uses Peter as an example of he's got plans far beyond our comprehending, just like God.
I've always heard that as little rock being taught about the big rock. Peter's the little rock. Jesus' admission is the big rock, the foundation of the church. And a lot of people want to get that wrong, especially in denominationalism. They want to say that the church is founded on Peter, the rock, which is wrong.
Right.
That's why he was considered the first pope.
Yeah. But yeah, we know that what that's really referring to is kind of Acts, that first coming together of, it's a mix of Jews, of Gentiles, kind of all in flux after the crucifixion of Jesus. They're not really sure, okay, this guy's gone now, like what do we do with that? And if you remember, it's Peter that gives the speech on the day where everyone is baptized, everyone comes together, they're speaking of tongues, the Holy Spirit descends upon the congregation, and that's kind of the first meeting of the post-crucifixion church. And that kind of sets the standard for things going forward. And so we see that, yeah, Peter isn't the literal foundation upon which the church is built. But sometimes whenever a landslide happens, it's not some massive explosion, it's not a massive object falling into the side of a mountain. Sometimes all it takes to start a landslide is just one little rock, starting an entire movement. And that's what Jesus means when he says, on this rock I will build my church. He's not the constant. He's the thing that gets things moving. He starts the church on its way to what it is today. And when that same kind of symmetry, if you want to turn your Bibles over to John, kind of head to the final chapter, chapter 21. And we see that Jesus is a big fan of symmetry, of ending things how they started, so to speak. And so, if we want to go to John chapter 21, and if someone wants to read verses 5 through 13. 5 through 13. This is after Jesus has been put in the cave, rock rolled over. This is after the disciples go to the cave and it's open and Jesus appears to them. This is kind of, he's appeared to them. They've been reunited, and now this is kind of that in-between time before Jesus ascends. And so one of our last stories that we get is here in 5 through 13, if someone wants to read that.
Then Jesus said to them, "Children, have you any food?" They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast, and now they were not able to draw it in because of the multitude of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had removed it, and plunged into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from land, but about 200 cubits, dragging the net with fish. Then as soon as they had come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have just caught." Simon Peter went up and dragged the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not broken. Jesus said to them, "Come and eat breakfast." Yet none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" knowing that it was the Lord. Then Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. This is now the third time Jesus showed himself to his disciples after he had raised from the dead.
All right, thank you. So here we see a very, very familiar story. Not exactly the same circumstances, but suddenly we start to see a lot of references to previous times in Jesus and the apostles' lifetime. He asks them, "Children, do you have any food?" And they say no. So he says, "Cast the net on the right side and you will find some." And so at this point, again, they don't know exactly who this is, but as soon as they heard Jesus say, "So cast the net on this side and you will find some," there's a little tickle in the back of John's brain and goes, "Boy, that command sounds familiar." Oh! And so he says to Peter, he says, "It is the Lord." And Peter, this time, without a hesitation, he doesn't say, "Well, since you said so, I guess we'll believe it." As soon as he hears, "It's the Lord," it's so interesting, just a different area. He puts on his clothes and jumps in the water. He takes his coat, he goes, all right, puts it on, and right into the lake. Because he knows now that this is Jesus. He doesn't need a miracle. He doesn't need even for Jesus to say it directly to him. He has John says, "It's the Lord," and he instantly, again, leaves behind the boat, leaves behind the fish, leaves behind the net, even though, again, it's a multitude of fish, probably a pretty decent catch. But he doesn't have a care in the world for that. He jumps right into the water and swims over to see Jesus again. It even says the other disciples, they at least held on to the net and pulled things in. And, so they're getting out of the boat and they're pulling this net, and here is Simon Peter sopping wet in his outer garment, wading up on the shore, just wanting to get to Jesus. And even after Jesus, forsakes, or even after Peter denies Jesus, after all these things, they've talked, and despite whatever awkwardness might be in the air, Peter sees Jesus and just wants to be with Jesus. And in a fun little throwback to times gone by, once they get up on shore, after they've caught all their fish, before they can actually put the fish up on shore, what is it that they see? It's a fire with loaves of bread and fish, alluding to another one of Jesus' miraculous, that's redundant, of one of Jesus' miracles. Because The same way, they didn't see a fire or fish or bread up on the shore, but they turn away to take care of the fish, and suddenly there's a fire with fish and bread. And of course, John mentions, bring some of the fish you've just caught. Simon Peter went up and dragged the net to land, full of large fish, 153, and although there were so many, the net was not broken. There's just lots of symbolism here at the end of John, that Peter, leaving behind his net and boat full of fish, doesn't actually turn his attention back to the net until Jesus tells him, why don't you bring that net of fish up? And then he comes back and they haul it up. And yeah, drag the net to land full of fish. And although there were so many, the net was not broken. I like to think of that being another object lesson of the apostles have been through a lot. Jesus has been through a lot. And even though they've been stressed, they've been beaten, they've been broken, they've been verbally berated, they've been physically abused, they're still here. None of them are broken. Jesus died, and yet here he is, with them again. The net that even though is so full, is so being pulled upon that by any normal means, this net should have broken. Jesus and his apostles are still there, just as Jesus had predicted, just as he had prophesied. They will tear down the temple, but on the third day I will build it back up again. And here he is 3 days later, after being proclaimed dead, after being stabbed through the side, after being wrapped up in linen, and being put in a cave with a large stone, never to be removed again. The net stretched, the net was beaten, but the net isn't broken. And their faith hasn't broken. Because as we see, Peter simply hears, this is the Lord, and he jumps in the water to be as close to him as possible. And just to reiterate the point there in verse 12 through the end, Jesus said to them, come and eat breakfast, yet none of his disciples dared ask him, who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. None of them, even doubting Thomas, even the ones who ran away whenever the crucifixion happened, not a single one of them had even a slight inkling of, is this really the guy that we followed for so many years? They knew exactly who it was. And as we look at the beginning of Peter's walk with Jesus, we see that the little bit of doubt that he started with, after all that he learned from Jesus, after all that he saw Jesus do, we see that there is not even a shred of doubt in Peter's heart now. And so, as we, going forward from our study of Peter, we get to see kind of the bookends of his career as an apostle with Jesus. We're going to see Peter the apostle without Jesus a little later, but as we kind of get to see the beginnings of the ends of his time with Jesus, we see that Peter is a great example of stalwart faith. Yes, faith that is shaken. We'll talk more about that later. He's not, he's not perfect like Jesus, and that's kind of the point, is that the people that are held up, that Jesus names by name and picks out for very specific purposes, he doesn't want us to think that the people that we look up to are perfect. He very clearly wanted us to know that the people we look up to have struggled, have gone through things that in any other normal circumstance probably would devolve them into something less than what they are. But that's why we look up to them, is because despite all the bad, all they needed was to keep faith and to have faith that Jesus was the Son of God. Any other thoughts on Peter the fisherman? Yeah.
I can't help but think they started out fishing, and here Jesus has died and rose from the dead, and they don't really know where he is or where he's gone. And they've gone back to fishing. And I think Jesus at this time appeared to them maybe to say, this is really not what I wanted you to do. Go back to the boats and the fish. But to repeat that they would be fishers of men instead of fishers of fish.
It's interesting. Yeah, he has them bring in that whole net of fish, and yet he already has fish cooking on the fire. Almost to say, like, you spent all your time out there when I've got everything you need right here. Yeah. Often, and yeah, I'll get to you in a second. Oftentimes, when you've gone through a traumatic time, your natural inclination is, to turn back to something that you know, something that's comfortable, something that you know to do. And so, this might have been a bit of, not coping, but a little bit blowing off some steam for, some guys who have gone through a heck of a stretch of a few weeks here. But Jesus, again, wanting to, show that lesson of, you've had your time, but now remember, I've called you for something bigger than just catching fish. Yeah, thanks.
My wife and I disagree on this, but I think this passage shows that it's good to have fish for breakfast sometimes. Down at Cottage Cafe, they have a good walleye and eggs. She finds that absolutely repulsive, but it's good. So.
Always good time.
Yeah.
I just think it's weird or strange or whatever that they told how many fish it was.
Yeah. Yeah. I did kind of look into the number 153, and I couldn't find anything significant, especially about that number. But I think in general, Luke very much was more of the analytical type, and that's why this is John. What am I talking about? And Luke, he mentions a lot more details of our first reading there. But John, I think, especially how he mentions, he doesn't ever refer to himself as John. He refers to himself, as the disciple who Jesus loved. Which, always comes off a bit braggadocious. But I think it's less so of like, I'm the one that Jesus loved the most. And more of just wanting to establish who he was in the story. In a certain way, not naming yourself is a level of humility. Addressing yourself just as, this is a guy who Jesus had a strong connection with. And less wanting his name to distract from the other people that he's mentioning in his account. But then John is also like known to, just include these odd details that are just kind of here and there, and they might be important to the story, but also sometimes it's just someone writing down what they saw. Yeah. Because large can be subjective. Large can be, what's I think about? Is 4 a bunch? Well, it depends. 4 fish? Not so much. 4 boats of fish? Yes, very much. Yeah.
If you're gonna have a fish story, you better count 'em.
Yeah, exactly. What is the line from every fish story of that usually that people tell?
So big.
The fish was this big. And so he specifies they were large fish, and there was 153 of them. Yeah. Just reinforcing the fact that this net should not still be in one piece. And yet it is. Yeah.
I'm just, in my mind, picturing these men sitting on the beach with the Son of God, and they are counting a pile of fish.
Yeah.
Like 1, 2, like they were so, I don't know, was it so excited? It wasn't just a lot, it was an actual number. And the other thing, numbers matter sometimes, especially when you're dealing with souls. And they're about to make this transition from fishing fish to fishing men. And a few chapters later in the Bible, over Acts 2, we have another number given. There were 3,000 baptized. And so they counted.
Yeah.
Well, size of fish matters too. If you're a fisherman, you catch some small walleye, you're gonna let it go
Yeah.
because they reproduce. That means there's always more. But if you would take everything, then there would be none.
Yeah. And so probably also, a catch of this quality of fish and this many high quality fish, for a fisherman, that's a lot of money you're gonna make. That's a good haul that either you can feed your family with, or you can sell to get money to provide for your family with. And yeah, again, Peter didn't care about all of that. He heard Jesus is here, and he jumped off the boat.
You got dressed first.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're gonna see the Son of God, you at least want to, freshen up a bit. But
Well, if they were commercial fishermen, that was their livelihood.
Yeah.
Fishing.
so yeah, all this I think to just kind of reinforce the fact that Peter was on the boat. He was trying to, kind of calm his mind, get things together. But yeah, still his mind was not on. His priorities weren't with the fish. His priorities were still with Jesus. Yeah.
Like Karen was saying that they were large. Well, if you are a fisherman, like she said, you throw back the small one, but it didn't say any of them were small. That's
Right.
easier to do.
Yeah. And that's just another uncommon detail that makes it seem like this isn't just them randomly catching a whole bunch of fish. This is divinely placed. Yeah.
And the fact that they went from 0 fishing all night long, cleaning and mending their nets,
Yep.
to 153 after one cast.
Another miraculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, Baxter.
The number is also more significant when we think about the fact John was not writing this as it happened. John was written 50 to 60 years later.
Right.
So I'm thinking John, as a 90-year-old man, is thinking back fondly to those 153 fish they caught 50 years ago.
Because yeah, this is, if I remember correctly, this is the final chapter of John. And so this is the end of his account. And of course, he's ending it all with, this is the account I write to you so that you believe that Jesus is the Son of God. But yeah, one of the last details that come into his head as he's writing all this down is, I remember those 153 fish. And I remember Peter taking a swan dive out of the boat as soon as I said the name of Jesus. So yeah, so as we kind of wrap up, for the beginning of our Peter study, we see that Peter at first had a little bit of doubt, but even starting out, he knew this guy's something different. And that quickly turned into, this is Jesus Christ the Messiah. And in the same way that he, leaves everything behind and goes to follow Jesus, as we read the end of his time with Jesus, let us aim to have such an unshakable faith and unshakable priority that nothing distracts us from following Jesus, from being as close to him as possible. Even miraculous catches of fish and crazy, wacky things that we might see happen can't distract us from the fact that we're on our way to Jesus. He's sitting there on the shores of heaven waiting for us. All right, and there's timer. Thank you for a great class.